All right. So, welcome to Alpha, and thank you, Stephanie. I hope everyone enjoyed their meal tonight. Tonight's topic is there more to life than this? I've been a member of River Run Church since November 2012. I love River Run Church. I love that I attend a church that welcomes me with open arms, with all of my flaws and all of my imperfections. I am welcomed every time I come to River Run Church. I am perfectly imperfect, and Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, would want me no other way. A recent study by the Pew Research Center shows that by far, Christians outnumber any other religion and will continue to grow between now and 2050. But despite the projected growth, it's also recognized that the rate of growth is going to slow, and it's going to continue to slow between now and 2050. The slowing pattern shown in this report is exactly why the Alpha course is so greatly needed. The reach of Alpha to those who have questions regarding their faith or lack thereof in an open, honest, and non-judgmental forum allows for hearts and minds to be touched by the Word of God. Recently, I realized that I'm an extreme recycler. I've recycled a little bit of everything in my life. Paper, metals, plastics. It's not a big deal. Most everyone's done that. But for those of you who don't know, my wife Terry and I, we're actually on our second time around. We're on a second go around. So I've even recycled a wife. Not very many people can say that. Seriously though, the one thing I've recycled more than anything has been my faith. For most of my life, I haven't been a Christian. I would characterize myself as maybe a loose or floating Christian. I felt my belief in God would carry me through because God and we had it like that. I attribute my lack of faith and commitment to a few things that I'm sure some of you can relate to. The first would be fear. As a child, I went to Sunday school with the neighbors. I didn't speak with my parents about the fire and brimstone lessons that I was receiving, and they didn't ask. And quite frankly, at 6 years old, they scared me. I had questions that my parents either didn't want to answer or they were too busy to discuss. The second would be rejection. As I got a little older, my mother had enrolled me in catechism classes, plus some additional classes to catch up, make up for some lost time. And I guess the easiest way to put it is I was kicked out of CCD. So it was at 12 years old that I learned my desire to be a professional bowler and own a bowling alley just didn't sit well with the sister who was running the charity event for the church. When she asked, "What's the most important thing in your life?" and I said, "Bowling and working." It didn't go over well with her, so I was gone. Again, I didn't have anywhere to turn to, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. The third thing would be boredom. I attended a Catholic high school, and I loved all 4 years. And I was remembered as a kid who got kicked out of CCD. I completed my required 4 years of theology. And to this day, I have no idea how I passed. Not just 1 year, but all 4, with a C average. I went to class and I went to Mass. I think the only reason I made it through was because I knew how to stand and sit and stand and sit and throw in a kneel or two. I was good to go. There was very little questions, very, very few questions that were allowed to be asked during the theology class. It was really more just information reception. I didn't have a strong foundation, and I felt like my lack of knowledge kept me on the outside looking in. I was loaded with questions, and still I had nobody to answer the questions or guide me. Terry and I joined the Navy, and we came here to Orlando for boot camp. We attended Mass every Sunday, but my secret was I did not attend Mass to hear the Word of God. I attended Mass to see my wife, Terry, who was in my sister company. I mean, it had been a full week since I had seen her and talked to her, and during services, I could hold her hand at different times. And God surely understood, and because God and I had it like that, I was sure he didn't mind. Over the next 20-some years, I couldn't find a church to attend that sat well with me. I know, shocking, because I went to church for all the right reasons, to hold hands. But I still had my belief in God. Looking back now, I didn't go to church because when it came to religion, I felt I was ignorant, and I didn't want anyone to know. I felt I didn't know very much despite my CCD classes, the extra lessons, and 4 years of theology. But because God and I had it like that, I was sure that he understood. I go to church now. I stand up and I sing. I sit down and I listen. The only thing that hasn't changed is that I'm still ignorant. And that's why I'm perfectly imperfect. It's why Jesus Christ loves me, and it's why my church family loves me. So I was and I am ignorant about being a Christian, but now I can say I'm learning. I'm a work in progress. I'm a piece of clay that's being molded with every Sunday service and with every Thursday evening Alpha course. I'm being shaped into the best Christian that I can be with the help of others who, just like me, are trying to make positive changes in their lives by attending Alpha and attending services. Nikki Gumbel, the founder of Alpha, pointed out that one thing that Prince Charles and Princess Diana were agreed on was that something was missing in people's lives. Prince Charles spoke of his belief that for all the advantage of science, there remains deep in the soul a persistent and unconscious anxiety that something is missing. And Princess Diana, speaking at a charity event, spoke of an overwhelming sense of loss and isolation that undermines many people's efforts to survive and cope with the complexities of modern life. They know, she said, that something is missing. I know now that something was missing in my life. I know that I was afraid to face my fear of church, to face my ignorance of church, to face my boredom with church. That something is no longer missing in my life. I embrace my church just as it embraces me. I laugh with my church family with no fear of being laughed at. Because through Alpha, I have learned that asking questions is normal, to be expected and desired. Because of my church and with the guidance of Alpha, I'm able to say Jesus Christ is that something, and he is alive and well in me. I remember the hollowness when something was missing. Terry had started attending church here at River Run, and our granddaughter Caitlin was going with her on Sundays. I'd always told Terry not to be in my face or try to compel me to go to church because God and I had it like that, and so I was good to go. But again, I began to feel that there had to be more to life than this. Just sitting at home on Sunday, waiting for my family to come home, even going to Disney, wasn't filling the void. I had missed out on something that they had done. They had gone and done it without me. I decided to attend church. I wanted to see why Caitlin was so excited about church. And honestly, I didn't want my at the time 4-year-old granddaughter to ask me why I wasn't going to church. I also wanted to find out why Terry was smiling and in such a good mood when she got home. Because as I had said earlier, for me, church equaled boredom. I began coming pretty regularly as my work schedule would allow, and I realized that I enjoyed it. One Sunday service, after a few months had gone by, I started thinking about how my life was transforming, and I smiled. Then I thought of all the cults that I had seen, read, or heard about. I remember looking up to find the ventilation system. I was looking for the mist to be pouring out because I knew River Run had to be pumping something into the sanctuary to make everyone smile and feel good. It couldn't be that they actually enjoyed Pastor Mitch's sermons that much. I remember kind of laughing to myself and thinking, if people in church only knew what I was thinking. By March, I contacted my sister in Mississippi and told her I was attending church regularly. I remember hanging up and thinking, why did I feel the need to tell her? Was it because she could validate my feelings because she was a strong Christian? Don't get me wrong, she was happy for me, but I still think I shocked her when I said I was giving money to the church. Everyone who knows me knows that I despise giving money to anyone. Our kids don't get money, at least not without an argument or a 30-minute lecture on financial responsibility. And I enjoy giving lectures a lot more than they hate them. Maybe I knew she was the sibling who could relate with my attending church and not tease me, which gave me a safety zone. By June, I had made the decision to change my work schedule and arranged to have Sundays off instead of Saturdays. Understand, this was very tough for me. Football season was right around the corner, and I enjoy watching my Buckeyes on Saturday. Real fans do not DVR football games. It was at this time I called my mom and told her I was doing my best to give back to the church. That things in my life really seemed to be taking a positive turn. Psychologically, monetarily, emotionally. I realized it wasn't just Terry that was smiling, but I was too. Our kids were doing better and Caitlin was excelling. My mom was so happy and we talked and talked. In October, I found out about and I met my son Josh, whom I had never known about. I began making plans to take a trip in mid-December to Ohio with Josh for the holidays to visit my mom and family, which magnified the anticipation of going home. In late November, I spoke to my mom a few days after the 24th anniversary of my younger brother's suicide. That was the hardest thing my family had ever dealt with. And in 24 years' time, it hadn't softened the blow. She had just gotten out of the hospital for the umpteenth time. She was becoming a physical wreck. And like all the other anniversaries, I told her how much I loved her and I missed her. But this anniversary, it ended with the joy of knowing I would be going home to see everyone in a couple of weeks. I couldn't wait for her to meet Josh, my now oldest son. She was just as excited as I was for her to meet him. I hadn't seen her in 16 months, and just as she had always been during my 20 years in the Navy, she loved when I came home. That Friday afternoon phone call was the last time I ever spoke with my mom. 2 nights later, she died in a horrific house fire. Physically unable to escape the fire that raged through her room and through the house. My mother was an incredibly kind, loving, and caring woman. Her final job prior to retirement was as a teenage pregnancy counselor. It couldn't have been a more perfect job for her because she had been a pregnant teen, and like many young teens, she had been shunned by her family for her actions. She was the only counselor in the entire county, and in the dead of winter, would drive all over the county to complete the in-home health assessments and counseling sessions. She had done this for 15 years until age 67, which had been just 7 months prior. At her funeral, numerous clients of hers showed up. They cried as they told me and my siblings, what an impact she had made on their lives, not just for the kindness she had shown them, but the respect she had given them and the respect she had taught them to give to themselves. She made an impact on so many people, and now she was gone. She took the physical abuse from my never-present biological father when he did present himself, but was still turned away by her own mother. She taught us to be kind to others. She taught me how to read and do math before I entered kindergarten. She taught me how to throw, catch, and hit a ball. She sewed and mended our clothes and reassured us how good we looked when our pants were too short and our shirts weren't just right. She left my biological father and she started out on her own, protecting her children. She would go out on dinner dates, not to eat, but to bring the food back to our car so my brothers and I could eat, because at the time we were living in our car. One of these dates turned out to be with a man whom I would eventually call Dad. She laughed with me in good times and cried with me through the bad. A time from November 25th, 2013 and April 2014 was the most trying and troubling of my life. I was immensely angry, but even worse, I knew my soul was in danger. I could feel the burning inside of me. I knew that if I didn't begin to dig deeper into my faith, I was going to lose an eternal war. Here I had thrown myself into my faith, and now I was being tested. Soon after my realization, one Sunday, Pastor Mitch talked about an alpha dinner and stated you could ask the unaskable questions. I pulled out my phone and I put the date in my calendar. In that instant, I made up my mind that I would attend Alpha. Alpha would be the deciding factor in where I ended up. Terry and I came to our first Alpha class, and I was ready. I was ready for Alpha to fail me. I was searching for answers, and I needed Alpha to be my justification to turn my back on my faith that I had only just begun to find. I think for many people, we go through life searching for the next great thing. And when we get there and find it doesn't satisfy us, we look to lay blame. I had been looking to strengthen my faith, and now I wanted to be able to blame Alpha for my lack of faith so I could move on and move away from the church. And Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the one who can satisfy that kind of spiritual hunger that is in every human heart. Or I needed Alpha to be my North Star, to show me that I was on the correct path to Jesus. Because with Jesus is where I needed to be. I needed Jesus to satisfy my spiritual hunger. I needed Charles and Terry Lord. I needed Pastor Tyler Jagan, who had just arrived at River Run. And I needed Stephanie Shell. She probably doesn't remember this, but Stephanie looked at the short, bald-headed guy, begging her not to change his table or things could get bad, like he was a cuckoo. I needed consistency, and she listened. Pastor Tyler ended up at our table that night also. The timing was perfect. They helped lead me in Alpha 1 year ago, and I am grateful for their wisdom, words, and smiles. Terry and I have completed the Alpha course 3 times. The questions get more intriguing. My commitment to Jesus Christ gets a little bit stronger. Terry and I are now Alpha junkies as we begin round 4. We enjoy the dinner a lot. At least I do. We enjoy the camaraderie, and we enjoy the conversation. Dinner was always the most important meal growing up. My mom had 7 kids, but she cooked like there were 70 kids. My mother's home was redesigned. And the rebuild was completed in February. The bedroom where she died is now the dining room. The dining room table now sits where she was found in the room. Our dining table was where our entire family came together and got along. Something about food will do that in my family. It couldn't be any more perfect. One Japanese woman put it like this. She said, in Japan, they need to eat rice. She said, it's like we've got two stomachs. We've got one stomach for ordinary food and one stomach for rice. And however much ordinary food, meat, potatoes, fruit, vegetables that we eat, we don't feel full. We don't feel satisfied until we eat rice. And I think if Jesus had been speaking to her, he'd have said, I'm the rice of life. I'm the one who can satisfy this other stomach. Jesus sits at our dinner table. Columnist Bernard Levin, who often used to say he was not a Christian, one time he said, for the 14,000th time, I'm telling you, I'm not a Christian. But he wrote this: countries like ours are full of people who have all the material comforts they desire, together with such non-material blessings as a happy family, and yet lead lives of quiet and at times noisy desperation, understanding nothing but the fact that there is a hole inside of them. And however much food and drink they pour into it, however many motor cars and television sets they stuff it with, however many well-balanced children and loyal friends they parade around the edges, it aches. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the one who can satisfy that hunger. And why is that? Jesus said, I'm the way and the truth and the life. First of all, this. Jesus brings direction to a lost world. He said, I am the way. Nicky tells a story of his friends who, when their children were younger, had an au pair girl. And this au pair girl was struggling with learning the English language, and she hadn't quite mastered all the English idioms. And one time there was an argument between the children in a room upstairs, and the au pair girl rushed upstairs to sort it out. And what she meant to say on earth, are you doing? But what she'd actually said was, what are you doing on earth? Now, the question she asked was a very good question. What are we doing on earth? Where do we come from? Where are we heading? Who are we? Does our life have any ultimate meaning and purpose? What happens when we die? These, if you like, are the really big questions. They're the first order questions of life. And I guess many people are on a kind of search. They're trying to find some significance, some meaning, some purpose. Leo Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace, also wrote a book called The Confession, in which he tells his life story, his search for meaning, for purpose. He describes how he rejected Christianity as a child, and then as he went through life, he became very ambitious. First of all, he thought, well, maybe pleasure is the answer, just having a great time. He entered the social world of Moscow and St. Petersburg, drinking heavily, sleeping around, gambling, just living a wild life. And he found that it didn't satisfy him. And he thought, well, maybe money is the answer. And he had inherited a large estate and started to make a lot of money off of his books. But he found however much money he had, that didn't satisfy him either. And he thought, well, maybe the answer is success, fame, importance. He wrote what the Encyclopedia Britannica described as one of the 2 or 3 greatest novels in world literature, but still he said that it didn't satisfy him. He thought, well, maybe the answer is family life, to give my family the best possible life. He had married in 1862 and had a happy family and 13 children, which he says distracted him from his search for the overall meaning of life. 13 children were distracting, trying to find the meaning of life. Don't understand that one. He said he'd achieved all of his ambitions and was surrounded by what is considered to be complete happiness. Yet one question drove him to the verge of suicide, and the question was this: what meaning has my life that the inevitability of death does not destroy? And he was trying to search in every field of science and philosophy and trying to come up with an answer to this, and the only answer he could come up with from philosophy or science was this to the question, why do I live? In the infinity of space and the infinity of time, infinitely small particles mutate with infinite complexity. He didn't find that very satisfying, so he started to look around at his contemporaries, and he found that many of them were just avoiding the issue. They weren't really thinking about it. And then eventually he found in the peasant people of Russia the answer that he had been looking for in their faith in God through Jesus Christ. 100 years later, nothing's changed. Freddie Mercury, the lead singer in the rock group Queen, had amassed a huge fortune, attracted thousands, probably millions of fans. He admitted in an interview shortly before his death that he was desperately lonely. He said this: "You can have everything in the world and still be the loneliest man. And that's the most bitter type of loneliness. Success has brought me world idolization and millions of pounds, but it's prevented me from having the one thing we all need, a loving, ongoing relationship. And ultimately, there is only one relationship that is completely loving and totally ongoing, and that is a relationship with God. And Jesus said, I'm the way to that relationship. I'm the way to find the purpose for which we're made." Nikki gives this response to those who say, well, what difference does that make in your life? He says, before he was a Christian, he was perfectly happy with life as it was. He wasn't searching for anything. So he gives this analogy of when he was a child of watching an awful black and white television that would get completely distorted and how painful it could be to watch. While watching the 1966 World Cup, England was about to score a goal, and the TV went out. Nobody had taken the time to search for a permanent solution for the television. They had found that there were certain things that you could do to improve the quality of the picture. You could put your hand around the back, you could stand on certain floorboards, and if you stood just right, it would get a slightly better picture. But not until they missed the goal did they decide that it was time to find a permanent solution. And what the television needed was an aerial. And once someone has experienced a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, it's like the aerial. You get a clearer picture. This is what life's all about. Jesus said, I'm the way. Secondly, he brings reality to a confused world. He said, I'm the truth. Sometimes people say, well, you know, it's great that he satisfies that hunger, but I don't have a need. Isn't it just kind of a crutch for weak people who need that kind of thing? And if you need that kind of thing, then it's great for you, but it's not for me. And logically, that can't be the case. Because if it's true for everyone. And if it's not true, then it's not actually great for those who believe something that isn't true. Because in a way, they're deluded. And C.S. Lewis put it like this. He said, Christianity is a statement which, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. So that's the question. Is it true? And Jesus said, I am the truth. I never realized how much evidence there is. One of the things that we do in Alpha is to look at the historical evidence of life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The resurrection is the linchpin to Christianity. Something fascinating is how many people who are used to looking at evidence who've come to the conclusion that it is true. a former professor of history at Oxford University, described the resurrection as the best attested fact in history. I hadn't realized how many of the pioneers of modern science were believers. Descartes, Newton, Kepler, Galileo, Locke, Copernicus, Faraday, Boyle, Mendel, Kelvin, Pasteur, Maxwell, and Simpson. Professor James Simpson, the scientist whose discoveries paved the way for safe, painless surgery, someone asked him once, Professor Simpson, of all the discoveries you've made, which of them was the greatest? And he said, well, actually, the greatest discovery I ever made was the day I discovered Jesus Christ. Nicky, who was a lawyer, stated the following: perhaps the greatest lawyer of the second half of the 20th century was Lord Denning. Lord Denning towered over the legal profession for 50 years. He was also the president of the Lawyers Christian Fellowship. He had looked at the evidence and come to the conclusion that it's true. But when Jesus said, I am the truth, he was talking about more than just a kind of intellectual truth. The Hebrew understanding for truth was truth as experienced. And there's a big difference between intellectual knowledge and personal knowledge, between the head and the heart. So let's try this analogy. I've been married to my wife, Terry, for just over 7 years, and I've known her for nearly 32 years. But supposing before I had met her in 1983 and was awestruck, I went into a bookstore and there was a book about her called Terry. Terrific. And I thought, looks interesting. I'll give that a shot. Chapter 1, her sparkling personality. Chapter 2, her extraordinary intelligence. Chapter 3, her immeasurable patience with me. Chapter 4, her tremendous heart. Chapter 5, her athletic abilities. That chapter would be 1 page long. It would be blank. Anyway, if I had looked at that book, I would think, wow, she sounds amazing. She's just awesome. That would be intellectual knowledge, head knowledge. But now I can tell you she is awesome. That's 7 years of marriage. Her awesomeness is written in my heart. So when someone says, I know Jesus is the truth, they're talking not just about being convinced of the evidence, they're talking about experiencing a relationship with the risen Jesus Christ. Jesus said, I am the truth. Thirdly, he brings life in a dark world. He said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. Jesus came to set us free from the things that spoil our lives and the things that are wrong in our lives. There's a big difference from the things that we do that are wrong and the mistakes that we make. We all make lots of mistakes, and our mistakes can be relatively harmless or even amusing. Nicky, in his teaching, stated that after the General Certificate of Secondary Education exams in England, they post some of the mistakes that students had made, and he had come across some of the ones that they had published. One person wrote this: in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, Adam and Eve were created from an apple tree. One of their children, Cain, asked, am I my brother's son? Another wrote this: Moses led the Hebrew slaves to the Red Sea, where they made unleavened bread, which is bread made without any ingredients at all. Moses went up on Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. He died before he ever reached Canada. Another wrote, Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. After his death, his career suffered a dramatic decline. And finally this: Johann Bach wrote a great many musical compositions, and he had a large number of children. In between, he practiced on an old spinster that he kept up in the attic. Bach died from 1750 to present. Bach was the most famous composer in the world, and so was Handel. Handel was half German, half Italian, and half English. He was very large. So the mistakes that we make can be relatively harmless, but the things that we do wrong really matter. There is such a thing, certainly in my case, as true guilt. Russian novelist and Nobel Prize winner Alexander Solzhenitsyn said this: "The line separating good and evil passes not through the heart, not through the states, not through between classes, nor between political parties, but right through the heart, right through every human heart." The Christian message is good news. That's what the word gospel means. And the good news is this: God loves you. And he loves you and me so much that he came in the person of his son, Jesus Christ, to live and die for us. And on the cross, Jesus took everything you and I had ever done wrong, said wrong, thought wrong. He died in our place. He died for you. He died for me. In fact, if you'd been the only person, he would have done it for you or for me. He loves us that much. And because of that, it's possible for our guilt to be taken away. He came to set us free from guilt. He came to set us free from addiction. The things in our lives that we hate, that grip us, he came to set us free from fear, the fear of death, and all the fears that go with it. Because Jesus not only died for us, he rose again from the dead. Jesus conquered death. He set us free to know God, to have a relationship with God. He set us free to change, to be the kind of person that deep down we're longing to be. He sends his Spirit to live within us, to begin to change us. The fruit of the Spirit beginning to grow: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. He set us free to love with a new dimension, because when we've experienced God's love for us being poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, that gives us a totally new love for everybody else, for God and for the world around us. So it's not just about having some great feeling. It's about going out and making a difference in a world that so desperately needs transformation. I don't think it's easy to be a Christian today. I think today, certainly living in this part of the world, I think it's much harder to be a true Christian than not to be a Christian. The headline for a newspaper interview with rock legend Alice Cooper read like this: "Alice Cooper has a dark secret. He's a Christian." And in the interview, he describes his conversion to Christianity like this: "It hasn't been easy combining religion and rock. It's the most rebellious thing I've ever done. Drinking beer is easy. Trashing your hotel room is easy. Being a Christian, that's tough. That's real rebellion." He's right. It's not easy, but it's not boring. It's not untrue. It's not irrelevant to our lives. It's exciting. It's true. It's relevant, because Jesus said, "I'm the way and the truth and the life." There are a number of ways to respond to what we've been talking about this evening. Absolutely, I've never been here before. I've never heard of Alpha, but I know exactly what you're talking about. I have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and it's the most wonderful thing, and that's great. Maybe you came from a Catholic church, Methodist, or Baptist church, any part of the church. I don't think which part of the church you come from is important. The important thing is that you have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Others might say, well, I'm not so sure that I do have that relationship. When Paul went to Athens and spoke of the good news about Jesus and the resurrection, there were 3 different reactions. Some sneered. And if you're here tonight sneering, understand that I'm not here judging you. It may not be the right moment for you, and that's perfectly fine. I appreciate you allowing me to speak. Other people, when they heard him, they said, I'm not convinced, but I'd like to hear more. I want to investigate further. If you're in that category, I encourage you to investigate further. There are lots of ways you can do that. You can do it totally on your own. You can get a hold of a New Testament and read it for yourself. You might say, well, I need help. You could go to any church in the area and say, could you help me? Is there a course I can get into? And Alpha is one course. It's a practical introduction to the Christian faith, but it's not the only one. We're not saying it's the best one. It's just one way of doing it. It's running now in thousands of churches, and I'm sure that you can find a course near you, or if you like, we'd love to have you here at River Run for the Spring Alpha course. The important thing is, regardless of where you do it, just do it. I encourage you to experience it and decide for yourself, just as I did. The point being, if what we're talking about is true, is of infinite importance to you, and it must be worth spending a little bit of time, a little bit of your time, come out and join us on Thursday evenings at 6:30 and investigate with us. Find out whether you think it's true. It's a free dinner with free conversation and no obligation. The third category of people when Paul went to Athens was those who believed. They only heard once, and they said, I'd love that. And there may be someone here tonight who says, I'd love that. And I would really love to have that relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And the good news is that you can experience that. It's a very simple thing. First, by turning away from the things that we know are wrong and saying, I'm sorry. Second, you can thank Jesus for dying for us. Third, you can put your faith in him. Jesus is here. He's alive and well in me and in you. And in closing, I believe there is an answer to tonight's topic. With Jesus Christ in your life, there is more to life than this. Thank you.